I'm Amy from Amy Bakes Bread. I have a sourdough baking website, which I love sharing recipes with you. Today we're going to be doing my sourdough discard cinnamon rolls. So if you've got a bunch of extra discards sitting around, or you just want delicious, soft, fluffy cinnamon rolls quickly, these ones cannot be beat. They're my family's favorite. They're the ones that I make whenever I'm kind of in a time pinch or a time rush and I don't have the time for my long fermented sourdough version. I think you're going to absolutely love them. Let's get started. We're gonna start off by using a stand mixer. So this is my Bosch mixer. I'm just gonna put in the center part here, stick it on top, and this is the dough hook. I actually have an entire YouTube video and blog post on my website written all about my favorite stand mixers, why I love them, and everything about them. But you know what I forgot? I actually want to measure out my ingredients on a scale. So that's how you put the Bosch together, but I'm gonna pull this off. It's just an easy turn, and I'm actually gonna put this on a kitchen scale to add my ingredients. Okay, I like to add my ingredients by weight. So we're gonna go ahead and tear our scale here. And the first thing we're gonna do is add in our sourdough discard. So this recipe is especially good for all of the discard that you have left over, or you can use active starter if you want to. It can be runnier discard than this. If it's a little more runny, then you may need a little extra flour in your dough. So that's the one thing to kind of watch out for. The other thing to watch out for is I'm using this straight from my fridge. So it's cold discard. And because of that, I want to make sure I'm using a warm milk, and it may take a little bit longer for the rolls to rise. If your discard is at room temperature, then it shouldn't take as long for everything to rise. So we add in our sourdough discard, and we're gonna add in the rest of the ingredients. I warmed up the milk. I'm gonna put in the warm milk. I'm gonna add in the sugar. I'm gonna sprinkle this instant yeast on top. It's about 1.5 teaspoons and about 7 grams. And you want to just watch. Immediately you're going to be able to sniff and smell that, okay, this is activating. You're going to start to see that this is like clumping together a little bit in that warm milk. That's what you want to see, to know that, okay, this is active yeast. It's going to be able to raise my dough, because we're not using the discard to raise the dough. We're actually using the instant yeast to raise it. The discard is just adding moisture and flavor to our rolls. So that's what you want to look for. If you wanted to use active dry yeast, you'd have to activate it first. And you would do that by putting a little bit of the sugar and the milk in a bowl, adding the active yeast on top, letting that activate together for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then adding all of that back into the bowl with your sourdough discard. So you could definitely do that. One other thing, if you wanted to freeze the dough at any point in time, I would add a little extra instant yeast, usually about, I kind of go about 1/3 extra. So instead of doing 7 grams, I may do 10 grams of instant yeast, because some of that yeast is going to die off in the freezer. So that's just something to keep in mind if that's something that you wanted to do. Okay, we're going to add in our rest of our ingredients. We've got our butter. We've got an egg. And then we've got our salt. Don't forget the salt. And our flour. Now I don't add all of the flour, but I do add most of it. I like to hold back just a little bit. You know, discard can vary in the amount of liquid that's in it depending on how fermented it is. So you always want to hold back a little bit of flour just so that you're not over flouring your rolls. Okay, now we're actually gonna remove the bowl from the scale and stick it back onto my mixer. You can mix this dough by hand. You don't have to have a mixer. I like using a mixer, it just makes it a lot easier, but I bake a lot of breads. But if you don't bake a lot of breads yet, or you just don't have a mixer, or you're thinking about getting a mixer, you can definitely knead this dough by hand. You just want to add a few extra minutes. check this dough. This actually is feeling really good. I don't know if I need to add any of that reserved flour in. I'm gonna let it keep kneading a little bit longer. This is one of the reasons that I do like to hold back the flour, because my discard this time was not as runny as it sometimes is. And so holding back just about a half cup of flour, actually maybe even a third cup. So it's probably only 50 grams of flour. That can make a big difference because you want to be able to pinch off the dough and roll it in your hands with no extra remaining. Now, let's say I did add all the flour and my dough was really dry. At this point, you could also drizzle in a little bit of milk if you wanted to, maybe a teaspoon or tablespoon or so, and knead it together with your mixer. It will incorporate. So not all is lost if you do overflour your dough. We're gonna keep kneading this for a few more minutes. Look at how beautiful this dough is looking. Needs a little bit longer. I can tell because when I pull it up, you kind of want to see that little bit of that window pane, and it just, see how it's breaking just a little bit? Want it a little bit longer, a few more minutes of kneading. Okay, let's check this out. Oh, this feels silky smooth. And when I pull it up like this, look at that. You can kind of see my fingers through there. That is window pane. So perfect. The dough is ready to rise. This dough is going to rise much faster than my traditional sourdough cinnamon rolls, but you still want to keep it warm. If you don't, it's not going to rise as fast. So I'm going to go ahead and stick it in a bowl, and we'll cover it up and let it rise. I have made these cinnamon rolls so many different times, and I have made them a lot by hand as well when I didn't have access to a mixer. So it is possible, but all you're gonna do is once the dough is kind of combined together, you can mix it with your hands or, a big spoon or something. And then it comes together in the bowl and you kind of have a shaggy dough formed. Then you start the kneading process and you're just pushing with the heel of your hand. And you just keep going with the dough, pushing with the heel of your hand. This is gonna be a great arm workout, but you can definitely do it. It just takes probably an extra 3 to 5 minutes or so as you're kneading the dough. And what you're doing here is you're really encouraging all of those gluten strands to start developing. And you want that because that allows them to trap the air as it rises, which gives you light, fluffy, chewy cinnamon rolls. Okay, so I'm gonna stick this in a container and we're gonna let it rise until at least doubled in size. Here's my container. In goes my dough. I like a clear container for this so that you can actually visually see the rise happen. And then I cover it with a plastic shower cap or plastic wrap. If you use a kitchen towel, you can, but it sometimes gets a hard part on the top of the dough, kind of a film, and that's not always the most desirable. It kind of will depend on your humidity, your environment, if that would happen or not. We're gonna set this in a nice warm place to rise. Instant yeast is still sensitive to temperature, not as much as sourdough, but it is. So you definitely wanna put it in a warm place, and that's gonna figure out how warm that is will depend how quickly your dough rises. Let's talk cinnamon filling. So we've already mixed up our dough. While the dough is rising is when I like to mix up the filling and the frosting. So I kind of like to do this ahead of time because I feel like I'm always scrapped for time, or I'm always rushing when it comes to actually serving the cinnamon rolls. So if I can mix up my frosting ahead of time, I just keep it in the fridge and then I can spread it on the rolls when it's time to go. So I like to mix this up ahead of time. So I've got my butter. Now we're gonna add our brown sugar. Now I prefer to use a really softened butter. It could even be a little bit melty, but you don't want it to be too melted. If you make this enough ahead of time, then it'll be okay if it's a little bit more melted, but you want it to be spreadable. You see a lot of recipes that you put the butter on and then you sprinkle on the cinnamon sugar. That's not my preferred way to do this. I like to mix it all into a paste and then spread the paste all over. I feel like you get more even cinnamon sugar goodness, and it's just how I've done it for so many years, and I really love this method. I add a little bit of flour or cornstarch as well into this filling, and I feel like that helps it to bind a little bit better to the rolls so it doesn't leak out as much. And then of course the cinnamon. It just brings so much good cinnamon flavor. Don't skimp on the cinnamon. Then you just go ahead and mix it together. I'm actually gonna get my hands in here and I just want to mix it so that it forms kind of a thick paste. This is what you're looking for. Definitely like a thick, spreadable paste. We're gonna keep this out right now. I'm gonna cover it just with some plastic wrap, and this will be ready for us to spread on our rolls once they've risen. If you mix this up way ahead of time, then you may wanna just pop it in the fridge and pull it out to soften up a little bit before you use it. Now that we've made our cinnamon filling, we're gonna focus on the frosting, and let me tell you, this frosting it just makes the cinnamon roll. We're gonna first start with our butter. And I prefer a less like cream cheese forward cinnamon roll frosting. And so that's why this one has quite a bit of butter compared to cream cheese than you may see in other cinnamon roll recipes. So we're doing cream cheese and butter. We're gonna whip those two together. And then we'll add in powdered sugar and our flavorings. Now, before I whip these together, let me talk a little bit about the flavorings. So regular vanilla extract works great if that's what you have. If you can find like this vanilla bean paste, it just adds that extra little bit of, you know, like the beautiful flakes and flavor of vanilla throughout. And then my secret ingredient is this maple extract. So just a little bit of maple goes a really long way, and it takes these cinnamon rolls from just like really, you know, great rolls to incredible, the flavors. I also love a little pinch of salt, and then we add in a little bit of heavy cream as well, just to thicken it up a little bit and loosen it and thicken it. It's kind of does both, just the nature of the cream. You could also sub milk for that if you didn't have cream on hand. So let's mix it up. I like to use my hand mixer for this because it's not usually like a huge amount of frosting or icing. And so this just helps me to just pull it out and make it quick and easy. But you could use a stand mixer as well if you wanted to whip together your icing. This is having a little bit of a harder time coming together, and I can tell that my butter and my cream cheese were a little bit colder. If you can use more room temperature, it's a little bit better. But as soon as I add in my cream and some of my flavorings, it's gonna come right together. And the key is just to like keep whipping it. I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. I use unsalted butter, so a little bit of salt can help this. If you use salted butter, you probably don't need to add in the salt. We're gonna do a little bit of this vanilla bean paste that's so delicious. And a little bit of the maple extract, which honestly takes these to a whole nother level. Definitely. That's worth grabbing. I'm gonna need to go around the sides and just get all the edges here just to make sure it all gets incorporated. Once it is looking like this, okay, you're gonna wanna still whip it for another couple of minutes. So look at that, how this looks, and then I'll show you in another couple of minutes what it looks like. You can kind of see what it did look like before, and then look how light and fluffy. So mixing it for, you know, at least 3 to 5 minutes makes the difference on this icing. I'm actually gonna keep this in the fridge and then pull it out maybe a half hour before I ice the rolls to let it just come back to, you know, room temperature. You could even re-fluff it a little bit and mix it if you want to. But if you're putting it on warm rolls, it's just gonna melt into the rolls anyway. So I found that you don't really have to do that. Yeah, now we're ready for our dough to rise. Come on, dough. Let's get going. My discard cinnamon roll dough is ready. So I'm gonna prep my pan and then show you how I roll out my rolls. So I like to bake these in a round pan. I just think they look really nice. And so in order to do that, I like to put a little parchment paper down. You don't have to use the parchment paper, but depending on what kind of pan you have, it's really nice to use it. So I just fold this up, the parchment, into kind of these little triangles. Then I find the middle of my circular pan here, and I'm just going to use my scissors and cut. Just like that. Then I can unwrap this. That was a little bit big, so it's all kind of guesstimating, but come back and I'm going to cut it just a little more around the edges there. In goes my parchment. Okay, we're ready to shape our rolls and stick them in the pan. Okay, my discard roll dough has risen. It's doubled in size. It's a little hard to tell when you don't put it in a clear bowl, but I can definitely tell. I'm gonna pull it out. I did keep this dough in my oven with the light on for a little bit just to warm it up a little, because my kitchen is cold today. I needed to warm the dough up a little bit. Okay, so I've got my dough here. This is gonna make 8 generous sized rolls. I don't even need to put any flour down. This is how beautiful this dough is to work with. So I'm just going to roll it out. I do like using a pastry mat so that I can see exactly how much I need to roll it. And I want to go about 16 by 12 is the rectangular size that I'm kind of looking for. So to do that, you can kind of go with your hands at first to kind of try to spread it out. And then I use a rolling pin. And if you do not have a good rolling pin, let me pause for a minute and tell you these handcrafted rolling pins are incredible. I'll put the link in the caption there. But I'm gonna roll this out, kind of go one way and then I go the other way. And then we wanna go up and just get a nice rectangle shape here. Okay, I'm almost to 12 this way, and I'm right about 16 this way. You do want the dough to be kind of even if you can, and it will spring back a little bit. That's pretty normal. This dough has well developed gluten, and that's what the gluten does. It springs back, and you want that actually in dough. So when you're shaping it, you kind of account for that by going maybe a little bit over, just because you know that it's going to spring back a little bit as you go. All right, gotta roll a little bit more this way. Okay, we got a nice rectangle here. I'm gonna spread on the cinnamon sugar filling. I love doing this paste. I feel like it really gets that cinnamon sugar in every little part of the cinnamon roll. So you just spread it on, and then we're gonna roll up these rolls. Ooh, I do like to go all the way to the edges too, just to make sure that I really get it everywhere. If you wanted to add nuts or raisins or something to these rolls, now would be the time to do it. It may cause them to gap open a little bit more as they rise, but it would taste delicious as well. So I would just sprinkle on some nuts or raisins if you like those in your rolls. And then we're gonna start rolling them up. Start at the edge that's closest to you, and you just roll in. And as I roll, I do try to keep it kind of tight. So I roll and I kind of push back a little bit. Roll it up and kind of push it back just a little. And that will just keep your roll nice and kind of tight together. When you get to the end here, I take this part and I flip it over and pinch together the seam. So I have one long seam going across the top of these rolls. So just pinch them all together. Then we're gonna flip it over so the seam side is down, and then it's time to cut them. We're gonna cut these into eight rolls. So I cut them in half. And then I cut them in half again, and then I do 8. You could probably do easily 10 rolls out of these 2 if you wanted to. And then I'm gonna just stick them into my pan. Now, if you sometimes get like these wispy ends, you can take the part of the cinnamon roll and just the end of it and stick it under on the bottom. Look how beautiful that roll is. We're gonna stick it right in our pan. I like to do that just so they can keep their shape, but you don't have to do that because they will kind of rise together and nestle together in the pan. Usually there's one that's a little bigger than the others. I kind of put that one in the middle, and then I do 7 around and the one in the middle. These look gorgeous. We're gonna cover them up and let them rise again until just about doubled in size. While these are rising, let's talk about baking them so you have them fresh in the morning. So there's a couple of options to do this. Because these are instant yeast, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, you can increase the instant yeast and then freeze the dough once it's shaped like this. So instead of sticking this in the pan, I could have just stuck it on a parchment lined baking sheet and frozen the dough. And then once it was frozen through, I could stick it in a Ziploc bag. Then when I want it, I'll pull it out, let it thaw, defrost, and rise, and then bake it. Usually that works pretty well for 3-4 weeks. You can keep them in the freezer like that. The instant yeast will die off the longer that it goes. So just kind of be aware of that. But I do that frequently with cinnamon rolls that I want to not spend all morning making cinnamon rolls. Another thing that I often do is I'll mix up the dough to this point before I go and actually shape them into rolls, and I'll just stick that dough in the fridge, and then in the morning I'll wake up, I'll mix up the rolls, let them rise, and bake them. That's another great way to do it. You could also mix them to this point and shape them and then stick them in the fridge right now and let them kind of rise in the fridge. The instant yeast will help them to rise. If they haven't quite doubled by the next morning, pull them out, let them continue to rise and finish rising, and then bake them. Doing it that way, you will get a little bit more of the cinnamon sugar kind of leaking out on the bottom, but they bake up gooey and delicious. So it's up to you which of those methods you want to try out. But I'm gonna let these rise. I'm actually gonna stick them on my dough mat. I just plug this in and I can set the temperature on here, and I'm gonna keep it kind of warm because my kitchen is cool. I put a towel down and then I stick because I have these colder countertops. So you put a towel, then I stick my mat on here, and then I put the rolls right on the mat. I turn the mat on. I'm probably gonna do it around 85 degrees or so. Let these guys rise. All right, these have definitely been popping up. Look at them, they're just about doubled in size. I'm gonna go ahead and preheat my oven and bake them up. If I press in on them, you can see that they spring back a little bit. You can see it kind of springs back a little bit. So that's what we're looking for. And I can tell that they have really puffed up and about doubled in size. So I'm gonna go ahead and bake them up. I have my oven set for 350 degrees and they're gonna go in. I just pulled these out of the oven. Oh my goodness. Don't those look amazing? Seriously, so good. I'm ready to top them with the icing. These are insane. Look at all that goo coming down. The gooeyest, just fluffiest, light as a pillow cinnamon rolls. Oh my goodness. Wow. I can't wait for you to try these.